Thanks everybody for joining us today. Excited to walk through the sales challenges that AI can help fix with our two hosts, Eric and James. Um, Excited to be here with everybody today. And again, thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit here with us and learn. So I'll give Eric and James a quick second to introduce themselves, so you guys can hear from the source who's going to be leading us today.
Sure. Thanks. So I'm Eric Carr, president of Compose. I'll probably go to the next slide real quick. We're a software development shop that we work with our clients in kind of building new applications, doing data engineering and integration, as well as AI. This talk will really focus on a lot of the learnings as well as experience and implementation challenges that we've seen with clients working with the sales dream in terms of implementing AI specifically in the sales function. And James, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so James Santee, I'm the founder of the Sales Dream. I spent 20 years in corporate America in sales leadership, and executive leadership roles in sales. And I jumped out and started to run my own consulting shop. Kind of on the left, you can see we focus in on helping companies and their go-to-market strategy, their process, their technology, the analytics, accountability, and talent. Since then, I've worked and partnered with the Compose team to start to really think about creating a RevOps system that's generated through AI. We're working on things like sales training and how AI can help support sales training. We're testing out some AI SDR functionality and capability, and we aspire to get to AI sales management and AI account growth planning. So just a quick update on what we're doing.
Great. Thanks, James. So from an agenda standpoint, there's really kind of three areas we were planning on going through today. The first is, I think, really providing some somewhat of a historical context. Obviously, generative AI has been kind of the buzzword, the tech trend of this decade for the last 2-3 years. We really wanted to kind of put that in context of like some of the historical trends with marketing, with sales adoption, and really, I think somewhat teeing up, where we see the sales tech world going, especially over the next decade. I think there's been some pretty fundamental changes that have somewhat limited that growth and that adoption in the past, and I think we're very excited about what AI enables. James will spend some time on the four core sales challenges. So really, both his prior experience with other clients as well as employers, as well as kind of what we're seeing with some of the companies that we're working with to really understand some of their core challenges and how they're both thinking about it, as well as like what are some options to kind of work through that. And then kind of the third section is somewhat of a follow-up to the first one, but really kind of focusing on where we're seeing the best adoption of AI. So we really do feel very much kind of like a crawl, walk, run approach is very applicable for a lot of businesses, and just wanted to kind of share some quick ideas that we're seeing that has worked pretty effective for our clients, as well as kind of demonstrating some early sales success. So kind of starting out, we do have kind of three polls spread out through this. So please feel free, something will pop up and feel free to answer the poll. We will revisit these at the end of the webinar. And, obviously also please feel free to ask questions as we're kind of going through the presentation. And we're happy to kind of either address that in flow or at the end. Give just a few seconds if people want to kind of look at the poll. So where are you exploring AI today for your sales team? And we'll share the results at the end of the webinar. So maybe kind of starting out, I think if people have seen me kind of talk, this is a slide that I really like using. Really believe like kind of the historical context of a lot of these technology shifts is really important to understand kind of where our current context is. I'm guessing many people on this call have participated or been a member of kind of the transformation waves with cloud, with mobile, and now with AI. And I think there's a lot of really specific patterns that I think are very valuable to kind of keep in mind as we're looking at how do we see adoption for AI happening over the next few years. one of the key trends is really kind of interesting. It's like really this consumer adoption has really driven a lot of the initial interest and engagement, and then that has gradually shifted to more enterprise. I think we saw that very clearly in the cloud wave. We're very much seeing it within the AI wave. I think the first year or two of AI was probably driven much more by consumer-centric use cases, and we're beginning to see more and more of a shift in interest to agents, to automation, as AI is becoming more prevalent within the enterprise. Secondarily, it also kind of creates kind of new opportunities. So I think with the internet, we saw new distribution, which we will talk about from a marketing and sales standpoint, and what the last 10, 20 years looked like. But then also that kind of led to kind of transformations in terms of new work processes, new workflows. And I think similarly, I think that's one of the main theses that we have around this AI wave. It is definitely working, moving more quickly. So I think the cloud wave, we're probably year 2025 in. I think our expectation, given the speed at which AI has kind of exploded, it's going to be a lot more quick. Obviously, we're probably a little bit in kind of a hype cycle right now. And however, as with many of these other waves, there's a lot of excitement at the beginning. There's kind of some experimentation, some exploration of what the right use cases are. And then you really have seen kind of, sustained innovation, sustained growth, sustained productivity improvements with cloud, with mobile. And we're expecting something very similar with the AI wave. So. And the reality is also, like AI remains pretty high on the list for a lot of executives. There's a Gartner survey from the end of last year, really kind of focusing on from a CEO standpoint, where do they see their industries being impacted? And, AI has significantly jumped to much higher than any of the other technologies out there. And then obviously, I think a lot of people, given the speed at which the market has been moving, we're still struggling to figure out, what the actual implementations will be, what the implications will be for their businesses. But obviously, it remains a very, very strong top of mind number one issue that a lot of people are trying to figure out. How do I best take advantage of AI for my business? And sales is really a critical area that we think is going to be really transformed over the next 5 or 10 years. So another chart that we like thinking about is really, where within the businesses are going to be impacted by AI from a value creation standpoint, as well as, where the adoption curve is, so where the positive outlook is. And, there's kind of two different clusters. We see kind of like sales and marketing and software engineering on the top. I think that's very much representative of what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years from a enterprise adoption standpoint. And then there's somewhat of a cluster, in the lower middle of a lot of other functions. I think customer service, customer success, R&D, there are some clear areas that are getting quite a significant amount of momentum. But I think what we really wanted to highlight is the sales and marketing function, as well as software engineering, are really kind of somewhat differentiated from a value potential with AI. And we really wanted to specifically focus on kind of that sales and marketing component of that. So I think starting with that, that sales and marketing focus, really wanted to kind of put, context setting around like how large these industries are today. So within the marketing, and this is US specific, the US marketing spend is approximately around $550 billion annually. The majority of that is in the digital marketing domain. That has been a pretty significant shift that we'll see on the next slide over the last, 10, 15 years. But also there's a pretty robust set of kind of like tools, software that are kind of really supporting that spend. So I think as we've seen kind of a lot of your traditional media kind of shift from from non-digital, like offline to digital, there's been a huge explosion in the MarTech space. There's been a lot of focus on how do you best enable these marketing teams to take advantage of the cloud, take advantage of these new technologies. Kind of putting that in context with the right-hand side is really on the sales side. It was actually interesting. It's relatively tough to get to an estimate of the sales market in the US. I think the rough estimation is it's around 3x the size of the marketing space, and it's very heavily driven by people. So as you can kind of see in the bottom right-hand side, sales tech and data, sales training, outsource sales services are a relatively small fraction of the overall market. So I think as you can see, compare and contrast on the left-hand side, a lot of your marketing spend has very much kind of shifted more towards some of the tools and the automation capabilities that are available. Sales remains a very, very kind of people-centric activity. And I think that's something that we see with AI really transforming over the next 5 or 10 years. And just kind of maybe putting an exclamation point on some of the trends, specifically in the marketing space. So this is worldwide. So it's a little bit a different metric than the kind of total size than the prior slide. But this really shows some patterns, some trends from 1980 to 2020. And clearly you can see a lot of these traditional medias. The red line is television, the white line is newspaper. Those were predominantly the main spends where advertising dollars were flowing, and that has significantly shifted over the last, especially 10 or 15 years. And I think the internet was a big part of that, but also a lot of this innovation and technology transformation has really driven search, social media, e-commerce, online video to be a much larger part of the marketplace. And back to the prior slide, even search, a lot of these digital medias have surpassed your traditional media spends. So I think just like kind of keeping this in mind, the internet was really kind of exploded in the 1995 to 2000 timeframe, but it took 5, 10, 15 years before some of these kind of traditional businesses began to be transformed as well as kind of cannibalized by some of these new spends. And I think we're expecting something similar in the sales space. So really kind of, I guess, highlighting, the last 20, 25 years in the marketing space, really the 2000s really began to start putting in place some of those foundations of digital marketing. So we began to see a lot more kind of like offline campaigns moving to kind of more digital first performance driven advertising. And then obviously search was a big component of that. So really, I think similarly in the sales space, we're really in this kind of like early inning, very similar to where we were at in the 2000s from a digital marketing standpoint, and really looking at from a foundational standpoint, how do you start putting some of these new technologies in place? 2010s, social mobile, there was really kind of a shift to kind of more, like content-driven engagement. And that was something that I think we saw across the board. And then today, over the last 5 years, I think we've seen a lot more focus on data-driven, AI-enhanced, privacy-aware marketing. So I think the nuances of advertising and marketing has become a little bit more challenging, but a lot AI has provided kind of a really key part of a lot of that activity. So, and obviously, like from a value creation, when we look back at the last 15, 20 years, this is a top 10 list of companies that are generating more than 10 billion in net digital advertising revenue. And around, like half of these players, so 5 of these 10 players are trillion plus companies. And it kind of highlights just how quickly the advertising spend shifted, as well as some of the at least the enterprise value created from many of these companies. So the reality is we don't have something really comparable on the sales side, but obviously, this is something that the internet enabled. It enabled like kind of different mechanisms of kind of delivering advertising. I think we strongly feel that AI is doing something similar, putting new companies in a position to be able to kind of create value in the sales domain and really tackling that, 1.4, 1.5 trillion part of the market versus the $550 billion marketing space. So, and then I think similarly from a technology standpoint, over the last 15 years, there's been a huge explosion. So Chief Martech is a really great website, blog that I like visiting. And, they've really been tracking very closely the progress of a lot of your AI technology or your Martech technologies over the last, 15 years. And we've seen a 10x increase in the number of companies, a 1000x increase over the last time period in this space. So this has been really kind of a very dynamic, diverse, innovative space, and we're looking something similar in the sales domain. So kind of pretty quickly shifting to the sales world. So I think similarly looking at how marketing has evolved, we wanted to kind of put together some context around, there has been some changes in sales over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, partially driven by technologies. I think this obviously the CRM adoption in the early 2000s, was probably one of the larger shifts. But the reality is you didn't necessarily see as much of kind of a value creation or a value impact for a lot of the businesses. So, you began to see like some of these marketing automation platforms kind of merging with the sales things. LinkedIn obviously has become a really critical element of kind of contacting and for outreach, as well as kind of engaging with potential buyers. And then, I think the 2010, 2015, this SaaS sales, like there's these number of these playbooks that evolved that James will kind of talk about more as we get into kind of these SDR account executive models, where kind of really focusing on these like inside sales, high velocity models began to kind of evolve. Now, there's obviously some challenges with that. We began to see kind of some of that dynamics. How do we see kind of more of a focus on kind of data-driven sales, customer success, sales engagement platforms? And this kind of really got us to, that 2015 timeframe. Over the last 10 years, again, we've continued to see kind of baby steps. I think data and AI creep began, or like kind of, it was more exposed in the 2015 to 2020 timeframes. COVID, I think, was a big driver of what happened, really shifting to kind of virtual sales over the last 5 years. But then today, where we're sitting, I think we're beginning to see more and more kind of these autonomous sales motions, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit more around how can AI actually kind of offload or augment what sales folks are doing, and really kind of driving more of that. I think another big component of that is really trying to provide and understand how people are buying, and really trying to customize those journeys much more specifically for those individuals. So really kind of getting, probably similar to the marketing space where you wanted to get to this one-to-one marketing, really trying to get to this one-to-one sales mindset. And I think AI is a great opportunity to kind of enable that. So really, I think as we're thinking about this, I think there's a lot of good positive takeaways in terms of what's happened in the marketing space, and we can kind of take those learnings into the sales space. I think MarTech was very much driven by focus on data, digital first workflows, really trying to measure ROI very early on, and really focusing on automation. And I think very, very similarly, I think many of those were challenges in the sales domain until recently. And I think we do see, from a human interaction standpoint, fragmented workflows, heavy people costs, and adoption hurdles. Those are beginning to shift much more quickly as we've kind of had this introduction of additional kind of sales technologies. So as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I think we really think about a lot of this journey in terms of kind of crawl, walk, run. And we really like this notion as we kind of engage with our clients, really trying to understand, how do we provide some leverage AI for enablement? So how do we get some quick wins, some sales efficiencies? And, we'll talk about some of the things on the left-hand side a little bit more in the third section. But basically, there's just some really great ways to kind of get exposed to AI, beginning to get some kind of traction, as well as kind of get some acceleration in the sales process. And that ideally leads to kind of this middle column. So like when you start looking at kind of agent optimized, how do you start kind of embedding AI more in some of the sales motions? You're beginning to see a lot higher efficiency gains than kind of those initial quick wins. And then on the right-hand side, really reinvention. So similar to what we've seen with other technology waves, as we get comfortable with what these new technologies can and can't do, how do we start embedding them much more deeply within the way that we operate? And then secondarily, actually start thinking about redesigning. So how do we go re-implement some of those interactions we have with customers? How do we leverage this technology to really be able to kind of drive and both enable people, but also kind of improve the overall sales process? So we'll kind of come back to this, in the third section, but kind of wanted to hand it off to James and really kind of have him kind of talk through some of the core sales challenges and what we've been seeing with both some of his clients as well as more broadly in the marketplace.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to come with like the universal idea of like some of the things that I hear from all of my customers when it relates to sales. And you hear a lot from me saying sales is broken. I really fundamentally think sales is broken right now today. And these are some of the 4 problems that we talk a lot about. The first one is sellers don't have the process or the skills to be successful. A lot of companies I talk to have a very transactional way to go to the marketplace. They are calling and looking for, one specific thing for their customers, trying to sell that one specific thing. They don't have a very consultative process. A lot of the executives I talk to, whether it's board of directors or CEOs, they don't believe that their sales team actually has the skills to win in today's marketplace, which that's a really tough thing to swallow, especially when your investment, back to Eric's point, like nearly 1.5 trillion, that's mostly salespeople. So again, if I think my assets aren't going to produce the way they need to because of a skilling issue or a process issue, that's a really big deal. Top of funnel is harder than it's ever have been. Selling in the attention economy today with our buyers is really difficult. It's harder than ever to get somebody on the phone. It takes maybe 100 outreaches to get to 3 to 5 people into a conversation. That's really difficult. So top of funnel is harder. Market share is really difficult for a lot of companies. And then we get into this whole idea of cross-selling. The horizontal ability to drive other products into your customer base that's existing today is a huge opportunity. I talk with almost every single one of my customers, and no one feels like they have that cracked really well yet. So I think there's a big opportunity inside that. And then you get to this whole concept of management teams, like they lack the disciplines and skills to lead. Almost every organization I walked into, they say like, look, I've got this really great salesperson. I promoted them into a sales leadership role. And, we might not have the process, the discipline, the infrastructure for them to be great, successful sales leaders, but, that's what we've done. And they were great sellers. So hopefully they're making great sales management. And what the reality is that 1 of 4 of these things are typically broken in a lot of organizations. In a lot of cases, I talk to companies that are like, wow, there's a lot of challenges across this. On the right-hand side, then you talked about the proliferation of MarTech. Sales has been the same way. I used to own a really big tech stack for a large organization, and we had to continue to bolt on like point solutions in order to solve for the problems that the salespeople are facing. So we just kept on stacking up these tech solutions inside there. They all came with low adoption and hard ROI to manage and measure. So it was really difficult, but it just continued to proliferate. Salespeople got tired of it. They got to go like, what are you asking me to do now? And then the last piece, and like kind of back this whole idea, is like human output acts as an impediment to acceleration right now. Most organizations are thinking, okay, I want to get to market more. I've got to grow more. I need to hire more salespeople. And I think if we can decouple this idea of like headcount sales growth is going to equal more revenue growth, I think we can say like, hey, what about better automation and better perspectives? And so the impetus of the sales dream here is we're trying to really figure out the problems companies are having and then pointing AI at it. I look at it like an analogy like this. When my wife and I were first married, didn't have a ton of money, like I'm sure a lot of people starting out. We went to Walmart and bought a bunch of like ready-made furniture but you had to assemble it, right? So I walked back with like end tables and like all sorts of stuff, TV stands. And I think about like this right now today is like, imagine if you had that same experience, but you had no directions and no tools to do it, and you just had all the raw materials in front of you. That's what it feels like a little bit with AI today. I think there's a lot of things going on, and it can be hard to be like, okay, well, what am I building? What am I building this for? How does it all come together? And how does it work functionally for the job I need it to do? And so at the Sales Dream, what we're trying to do is work with Compose Lab to build these tools out to say, okay, how do we become purpose-built in the way we're bringing AI to the table so that people can unlock it quickly, get access to it, and solve some of the biggest problems they're facing today. So with that, we've got a survey for you that we want to ask you the question of, after I introduce those 4 things, what do you think is the biggest challenge you're facing right now of those 4? Is it process and sales training, top of funnel demand, wallet share expansion, or sales and leadership accountability? I'm curious to see what the audience would say about those 4 elements and some of the challenges they might be facing. Okay, is that long enough, you think? Okay. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we built with Compose. And one of the first products we brought to market is a sales training product. And when you think about the left-hand side, this is the adult learning curve for think about retention. These are retention rates as percentages on the left-hand side. So if you start up a lecture, if you walk into a lecture, you're going to retain about 5% of that lecture. Eric and I have kids in college for the first time, so I feel a little bit bad for them as I think about this. Like, wow, they're walking into a lecture, walking out with 5% retention. If you get to reading, you get to 10%. Audio visual, you're at 20. Demonstrations, you're at 30%. Group discussions, you're likely at 50. By practicing doing as adults, we're at 75%, and then all the way to teaching at 90%. And so when we built the tool, we've got a lot of different content in here from an audio visual standpoint. So it's a complete web-enabled tool that allows you to go in and learn about frameworks, how to be more consultative in your sales process. So it teaches you best practices. The nice part is right away, once I teach this idea, then you can come in and practice with a sales coach. So I get this 75% by doing right away. So as a trainee, you learn from the content and the audio visual, but then you practice with an AI coach. And so, the Compose Lab team has brought that agent to life for me around a coaching standpoint. Not only can you practice with your coach and get some some guidance and feedback about how you did, you can actually create some simulations then. So you get into a world where I want to put it all together, all the learning I just had, and try to practically apply it. But I want to do that in a safe space. So I have an agent simulation where I can, do a prospecting call, a discovery call. I can do a final proposal and presentation all the way down into a negotiation. Through this process, we want people to have leader-led discussions as they go through this, and then ultimately listen to each other as they role play. So you get a good example of, kind of bringing this platform together and some of the ways that AI is incorporating into sales learning and development here, so we can increase the proficiency of that large spend we have in our salespeople today. You want to click the next one for me, Katie? Perfect. So the reality that we're all facing is really simple. Like, customer interactions are more limited than they ever have been. It doesn't take you far. You can go ask your sales teams today, hey, how many attempts does it take to actually get a phone conversation? And you're going to realize the at-bats are lower than they ever have been. The other part is then, okay, so we're getting less customer exposure and FaceTime with our customers. Salespeople are basically practicing less than 30 minutes per month. And so we're not getting the in-game experience, but we're also not taking any practice reps. To compound this issue on the right-hand side, then you got buyers have more information and have more people involved in their buying committees than they ever have been. So if you think about the inverse relationship here, buyers are getting more and more knowledgeable, having more people at the table. Sellers are getting less and less experience because they're getting less and less interactions. And we're kind of shrinking that capability as buyers' capabilities are expanding. So we've got a little bit of this push point that we definitely need to be into as we go forward. And we've got to have a way to develop and practice so that limited interactions produce results. And so if I have a limited amounts of interactions with my customers, I need to make sure my sales team is as prolific as they can be when they have those interactions to produce the best results for my organization. So, we're living in this weird world. That's why purpose-built AI for sales training, I think, is going to be a really big deal. And it's why, I partnered with Compose to bring that thing to life. Maybe the next one, Katie. Perfect. So the next endeavor we're actually tackling with Compose right now is really thinking about this outreach perspective. So I'm going to kind of go through this lineage of the SDR, and I lived this through myself. I helped build an SDR organization inside my former employer. I've talked to a lot of companies that have SDRs, and really we start with this idea like sellers did it all, but a lot of their time, 40 to 60% of their time, spent on research and outreach, right? So I'm trying to find the right company and trying to get a hold of the company. If I'm a $200,000 seller, that's a lot of cost based into a researching perspective there. So, and sales leaders have the desire to say, I want my sellers to spend more time, being out in front of salespeople. And so, early adopters, maybe like mid 2015, 2016, 2017, we're starting to build these SDR organizations. What's crazy is I still talk to companies every single day that hey, we have this old school problem. We're actually going to go solve it with, introducing SDR roles. And so SDRs were inexpensive ways for us to do research and outreach. Think about an SDR supporting 3 to 5 sellers. They're out there outreaching, trying to book meetings, discovery meetings on behalf of the seller. And so they're out there doing these things. Today, there's over 600,000 SDRs employed in the US alone. So this has been a big proliferation. Industries are different, right? Sales and service SaaS technology companies have a ton of this, right? And so it depends on where you are. The problem with every company I talk to, they have low tenure. These salespeople or these SDRs are low tenure, they're high turnover. And almost every single one of them going has this really even worked? Is this just another layer? Have I bifurcated my sales process now and got my best cold callers, which were my experienced salespeople, away from actually cold calling? And now they're sitting back and maybe a little bit lazier than they ever have been. I think we're actually going to get to the future world, which is the Renaissance. What we're building with Compose and some AI technology is an AI tool for sellers. So we can, kind of eradicate this idea of this intermediate of an SDR. We want to create an automated tool where it's sellers are able to just basically set and forget their automated go-to-market strategy, the motions, the cadences, the 14 to 16 touch points we need to have, automatically generate emails, LinkedIn, text messages, and really the only thing a salesperson has to do is intervene with a call. And so we're starting to talk with organizations now saying look, imagine your best sellers in your company spending an hour every single day prospecting by cold calling and cold calling only. Everything else is auto set and forget. You know what? There are a lot of companies that are getting really excited about that idea. We think there's an exponential outreach component to this as well. So not only can we hopefully mirror or get better results from an interaction standpoint, but we also think we can turn the velocity up quite a bit. So think about it this way. Foundationally and fundamentally, the Sales Dream is focusing on two things: helping you upskill your talent so that they can have better quality when they have conversations. The next thing we're pivoting to right now is then being able to amplify those conversations and turn the volume up. So once we get good at skills, we want to amplify it. And I think you've got to be careful if you want to do it the other way. If your skills are kind of crappy right now, but you want to turn the volume up, think about amplifying a noise that's out to a big marketplace. If it's a bad noise, are they going to want to listen to it? You know, we want to make it sweet music. So you can take some training, get some sweet music, and then turn that music up as loud as you can to your customers. And then again, really thinking about purpose-built AI so that we can get some of those problems that these companies are facing today, build the right technology so it's easy to adopt, quick to go, and you don't have to build it yourself. You can start to adopt it quicker and get the benefit and output. All right, I think Eric, back to you.
Yep, sounds great. I appreciate it. Yeah, so this next section, I think obviously, I mean, hopefully people get the sense that both James and I are really excited about what's going on in the sales space. Obviously, we're making some investments and partnerships to really focus on some key areas, but also obviously, you know, there's other kind of low-hanging fruit out there. So I think some of this section will just kind of reinforce some of the parts, some of the concepts that James kind of mentioned, and also hopefully give some practical advice in terms of where we would recommend you know, kind of either starting or continuing to accelerate your journey with AI within the sales function. So before kind of jumping into that, just kind of a third question, this will pop up. So what are your biggest concerns about implementing AI for sales? You know, please take a quick read of the 5 options out there. And again, we'll share these the results at the end of this session. So kind of one of the key areas that kind of James mentioned was really around kind of touch points. So I think the ability to kind of have engagement to get like a buyer's attention is significantly reduced. Also, a lot of it has kind of shifted much more to self-serve and other channels. And I think we continue to think about this kind of sales and marketing dynamic. So as you think about the various touch points, either from sales, either from marketing, or a combination of both, it's really critical to both kind of understand what's out there, measure it, as well as kind of drive some of those. So I think what we have strongly seen as one of probably the larger gaps with a lot of like new AI projects that have kind of been undertaken in the last, say like year, is really kind of a lack of like success criteria. So really, as we go into many of these organizations, there already are sales metrics in place to really understand what do you define success as, and really trying to map those to what AI is specifically trying to impact. So on the right-hand side of the chart, I won't read them out, but there are some pretty specific metrics that we very much work closely with our organizations, our customers, to really understand kind of where they are today, kind of chart a path towards what would be potentially realistic, as well as kind of driving that. And I think as with many technology implementations, really iterating and learning is a really critical part of that. And really just given, as James mentioned, the number of touch points and the opportunities it swings is getting much smaller, as well as the buyers are beginning to become a lot more knowledgeable. Really optimizing on those very specific interactions you do have is becoming much more critical. So I think kind of as kind of reiterating some of the comments that James mentioned, just where does a salesperson spend time? So like around 50-60% of a salesperson's time is spent on actually selling activities. So roughly around like 30-ish%, a third. A pretty significant amount is administrative tasks, and then there's some other components. And this is a little bit of a stylized view on the upper left-hand side, but really, as we're thinking about both where organizations are today as well as where they want to go, you need to have a straw man to focus on. So I think the reality for a lot of what we're looking at doing is like, how do you go automate some of those sales activities so you're able to have the salespeople focus much more on the selling activities, reduce the amount of time on administrative tasks, as well as have a shift in some of these other areas. So again, like if you're able to do that, so if you're able to kind of automate some of those administrative tasks, you're able to free up 10 to 15% of a salesperson's time on a weekly basis. That can make a pretty material difference. It's almost 50% increasing the amount of time that they're currently spending on selling. I think there are some clear, benefits of CRM. CRM automation, there's a number of proof points out in the marketplace that it does lead to better success from a selling standpoint. As well as the reality is, like, given that we've gotten to much more, especially in the B2B space, these interactions are much more virtual, much more digital. A lot of these automations have a lot more opportunity to basically go kind of drive results. So all to say is, as we start with many of our clients, we really want to kind of understand from a baseline where they are today, as well as how do we start optimizing some of those kind of more repetitive manual tasks that happen. And as we'll kind of talk through some of that. So, and just kind of teeing up, I think I mentioned in the first section, really, the MarTech space has gone from 150 vendors to 1,500 to 15,000 in the last 15 years. It's been a huge explosion. There are a pretty significant number of vendors in the sales tech space, but it has lagged. So it's around, not necessarily like an order of magnitude lower, but it's around 7 or 8 times smaller in ecosystem. However, with the explosion of AI over the last 2 or 3 years, we are seeing more and more investment in this. So obviously, trying to navigate this is becoming much more challenging for a lot of companies because there's just a lot of unproven technologies out there. But also, there's a big component of where can you actually leverage some of the existing tools? Where are there some kind of custom workflows that you can implement on top of your existing solutions versus having to go buy another tool? But I think a lot of this is trying to kind of align to, what are the key steps? So I think the left-hand side, the sales tech landscape is a little bit of a, catch-all, but I think, many of these, sales tech stacks, we're really trying to figure out, like, on the on the right-hand side, what is this flow? So, like, who do you sell to and why? How to engage and when? Why they should buy and from you? How do you close? How do you upsell, cross-sell once you're in, as well as kind of some of those management elements? Those are really things that we're making investments in with the sales dream to really understand what the gaps are with existing solutions. How do we augment things that already exist today? But then secondarily, if there are gaps, if there are opportunities to create kind of new tools and new products, that's something that we've been seeing quite a bit of interest, as well as early success in kind of the investments that we've made. So kind of coming back to this kind of crawl, walk, run, I think this is something that we've continued to kind of focus on with our clients. I think a lot of customers have really kind of not had a framework, have not had a roadmap in mind when they've kind of adopted AI, and that has really led to, part of it has been like kind of the hyped expectations, but secondarily, I think a lot of companies have been challenged in actually executing on these. And I think we really do strongly recommend starting with some quick wins, kind of evolving to kind of optimizing some of those to really kind of embed. And then, that puts a lot of organizations in a much better position to kind of, go towards more kind of like automated kind of action. So just kind of spending a little bit more time on each one of those. So this is really that kind of crawl stage, AI supporting existing workflows without changing the sales models. There's some pretty great use cases. So people, have not used AI for drafting emails, drafting LinkedIn messages, helping with call follow-ups. That is something that is very, very low-hanging fruit. I think what we, at least some of the metrics that have been published by some of the large, AI providers like OpenAI and Anthropic, there's still a pretty small percentage of usage for these types of scenarios. So there's definitely some upside. There's some opportunities for more adoption there. Specifically on the deep company research side, that's one that like we would highlight is just kind of been game changing. So a lot of these tools began to kind of pop up in Q1. It has been driving a lot of what we do as an organization. I think also working with the sales dream, but really that's another very quick way of kind of leveraging AI to get a better understanding of your customer, getting a better understanding of their industry, and really kind of creating kind of more of a personalized outreach. And this is something that, again, you don't necessarily need to have like deep integration with your CRM system or have to go buy a bunch of tools, but it's something that you can leverage very quickly to really be able to kind of generate a lot of value. And that's, I think, as one takeaway out of this, if you have not played around with some of these tools, either to kind of generate some, email templates and or experimented with some of these deep research tools that have continued to evolve pretty aggressively over the last 6 to 9 months, that's a strong recommendation, that I think hopefully would kind of begin to set you on, a journey to really understand understand how much AI can do for your business. There's other areas. I think everyone has gotten used to kind of the sales, the AI bots kind of showing up and kind of summarizing messages, meetings. I think there's some like kind of account research. There's kind of competitive battle cards, but I think we would. Again, this is one of these scenarios where experimentation as well as experience are really critical. So really just kind of going out there, trying out stuff, seeing how some of the AI tools can actually help you better think through the way that you're going to be tackling a sales call, how you're thinking about a company is a great starting point. Now, again, there's great tools like the Sales Dream where you really want to get beyond that kind of initial kind of kicking the tires, but that's something that I think we would strongly recommend for everyone to kind of start this afternoon. So kind of getting into that walk side, so as you begin to think about AI is embedded in the sales motion, so boosting efficiency and effectiveness. I think this is beginning to get a lot more in the domain with, kind of where we're focusing on with the sales stream. So as we think about how do you kind of optimize in a more precise manner, how do you measure kind of, adaptive outreach cadences? How do you provide kind of more personalized, targeted information? How do you use prior engagement information to really optimize what you're doing from a sales standpoint? So I think we feel like there's pretty significant opportunities. I think with marketing, one-to-one marketing, with a lot of what's happened from an e-commerce standpoint, from a personalized content, a lot of those types of technologies as well as approaches are very applicable. And really, what AI is beginning to give us is the ability to scale that out to a much larger set of customers, as well as with much more consistency. So I think not only is it ideally kind of improving the hit rates and the conversion rates, but also secondarily, you're getting a lot more of a consistent experience. So as you're kind of selling as a company, you really want to have a similar narrative in terms of what the value proposition as well as what the product or service is for that. So really, this is something that there are definitely a lot of tools that are available, within your typical CRM packages. There's also kind of a number of the kind of data providers that are adding these capabilities. Our sense and our feedback that we've heard from customers are many of them are still more nascent. I think there definitely are pretty significant opportunities to not only for these vendors to continue to improve, but secondarily, I think there's a lot of interest in kind of augmenting that with additional AI coaching tools, with AI SDR tools to really be able to kind of help accelerate what already exists within some of these. And then you start getting into this run. So as you think about as we kind of get more comfortable with what AI can do for your business, how do you really fundamentally transform your sales processes? And I think a big part of that is really how does that AI take more of an autonomous role? I think there's a lot of excitement at the beginning this year about agents. I think there's a little bit more concern about that today because I think a lot of people, it is one of those new technologies that people are still struggling to figure out how do you best optimize and integrate it into an existing workflow. And, really people have not taken this kind of crawl, walk, run kind of mindset. But really what we've seen, and this is maybe a little bit more on the technical side, but if you're in the AI space, you'll probably hear human in the loop and human on the loop. And it's really this notion around like how do we continue to optimize kind of the human plus AI interface or interaction? So really, in many cases, we're not really trying to replace people with AI or AI with people, but really looking at like how do we take advantage of what people are really, really good at? How do we take advantage of what AI is really good at? So AI is really great at just, pounding, doing research, automating that, 24/7. People, there's still a very dynamic element to really engaging with people at an interpersonal level that, people are still, very, very good at. So really, I think we would view it as kind of somewhat of a spectrum. So I think we're beginning to see more of these processes built around human in the loop. So how do we have AI augment as well as accelerate what's happening? And then eventually we will get to the point where we have like people like human and like on the loop, which is really if there's an exception, really just kind of handling some of those like kind of edge cases as opposed to the more traditional ones. So again, this is where we feel the market is going. I think we're beginning to see more solutions out there. I think both the Sales Dream as well as Compose are beginning to kind of get, more of our clients have kind of gotten to that crawl walk phase or looking at running, but really kind of accelerating the marketplace. This is really where we see over the next 5 or 10 years, really a pretty significant transformation around how sales happens today. I think there's going to be a lot more focus on some of the AI tooling, a lot of the data that's available, as well as kind of like how do you go plug this into kind of the interactions, the life cycles that currently exist with customers. So with that, from a path forward standpoint, I think both James and myself would strongly encourage you to kind of continue to look at AI as a really powerful enabler of your business, from specifically sales as well as more broadly. I think we're beginning to see some pretty strong proof points. Now, in many cases, this might not necessarily be rolled out to the entire organization. We're seeing pretty significant increases if we're able to reduce the amount of research time that sales individuals are spending, and they'll kind of focus more on customer facing time. That's a very clear metric that we can focus on improving. We have seen pretty significant reduction in the sales cycle times if we're able to really automate some of these flows and really kind of accelerate the ability to identify intent signals or identify individuals that are at the right point at the right time to be, that are interested in buying. Obviously forecasting, is probably less interesting for like the typical salesperson, but really trying to get a better understanding of what's working, what's not working is really, really critical. And being able to kind of automate some of those sales calls, do kind of a post analysis and summarization, tracking some of the to-dos. There's a lot of that kind of mechanical stuff that AI is very, very effective at. And also by kind of leveraging that into or integrating that into your CRM system, as an example, you can get a lot better data within there, as well as it ideally leads to kind of better forecasting activity. And then, end of day is really, how do you go drive things through the pipeline more quickly? So we're beginning to see more and more of these leads converted to opportunities, improving opportunity to close rates, really, see pretty significant improvements when you're able to kind of really help focus and accelerate some of those tasks that sales folks are doing today, and really leveraging AI for that purpose. I think similar to probably marketing. I think a lot of your marketing tools and your best practices really enabled many people to kind of adopt the best marketing practices out there. I think we're seeing something very similar in the sales space. So with AI, we're able to actually emulate some of the best sales individuals in the world. Here are the approaches that they use to really become effective sellers. How do we help enable? How do we help train? How do we actually kind of automate or kind of allow AI to kind of drive more of that is really what we're seeing. And I think we're really, really excited about what's going to happen in the next 5 and 10 years. And hopefully this has been helpful for you. We do have some kind of like immediate action, short-term initiative, strategic. I think again, like we really think in terms of phases, in terms of iterations. I think that's definitely been what we have seen as the most effective way of adopting AI. You really need to establish a baseline, identify some quick wins, and just get something out there. I think is a really great start. Short term, you're going to start getting into the data. You're going to start getting into the integration with your existing tools. There's obviously going to be a pretty large change management component. So I think we feel like kind of that training plan is really, really critical for success in the use as well as the value creation with AI tools. But also, I think hopefully this talk will, kind of provide some historical context around how some of these other tech waves have evolved, and really how to put yourself in a position to start thinking about where the market's going, where the puck is going. How do you really leverage AI in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years to really put that right foundation in place as kind of the sales world gets as revolutionized as what we've seen with marketing over the last 10, 15 years. So with that, very much appreciate the time, and both James and myself be happy to talk about some, or answer any questions. Before I jump to that, just wanted to pop out quick.
We do have one
Katie-
question too.
Oh, yeah.
That I was going to ask. I think this is directed at James, but Eric, feel free to answer too. Someone asked, is 1 hour focused on cold calling a conservative amount of time in your opinion?
Yeah, well, so if you're using some like automated AI SDR, like, yeah, that would be a minimal amount. I think a lot of companies I talk to and a lot of salespeople I talk to, they're 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day prospecting. So I think depending on your goals and what you're trying to get accomplished, if you're doing it 1 hour in like a traditional historic way, you're not going to have a very big funnel, I would expect. I think you'd have to use some tools that are going to be really focused in on how to help you short circuit a lot of that research, understanding, identifying the right company, and then trying to get a hold of them. So it's usually a pretty laborsome process, which takes way longer than an hour, in my opinion.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions, or happy to, or I want to share it too quick? Or you just wanted to kind of, or Katie, do you want to talk through it?
Sorry, I was gonna say I'll let you know if any more come in. That's all we got right now, though.
Sounds good. So, okay, well, as we're waiting, again, feel free to post any other questions, but just some of the poll responses. So, Katie, appreciate putting this together. So, where are you exploring AI today for your sales team? Quite interesting. Many are integrating with existing tools, and 0% testing solutions. Sorry, considering bespoke solutions, not actively exploring, and we're already implementing AI tools. So, I think this looks like relatively, just flat distribution. So people are on somewhere on the spectrum of where they're from adoption standpoint. Beginning to see a lot more adoptions, around like half the folks that announced or indicated that they're evaluating custom solutions or already implementing. I think 1/3 of the responses are not actively responding. So I think this is pretty typical. But again, I think we do expect this to continue to accelerate. We do feel AI is very different than other historical tools that have been provided to the sales teams, and we're really excited about what that's doing. So hopefully this, for the people that are not actively exploring AI, hopefully this webinar gives you some thoughts around what to do next. So. Poll number 2, which of these sales challenges is your biggest pain point right now? Process and sales training, top of funnel demand, wallet share expansion, and sales leadership. So, I think top of funnel, I think that obviously is, what we're seeing across the board. We've seen even companies where we thought like AI would be more applicable for operational use cases, have really focused on that kind of driving top line. So that obviously is a key area that we're working with a lot of our clients to really understand what's working today, what's not working, as well as how does AI kind of leverage into that. I think that's interesting. Process and sales training. I think I would say that's a pretty positive indicator. So that's the second, at 25%. Generally, we see a lot of our customers not really prioritizing as much as we think. Obviously, I think from a process standpoint, from sales training, we are obviously biased, but I think those are really the critical ways to get more leverage out of your sales organization. If there's not the recognition and then not the investment there, it's going to be pretty challenging to get to top of funnel, get to wallet share. And then sales leadership and accountability. That's an interesting one. That is one that we are seeing it as probably like number 2, number 3 on the list, but obviously, like getting better metrics, really trying to understand the behavior of what's going on in the sales organization is pretty critical. And, both AI and some of these tools are getting additional capabilities for that. Okay. James, sorry, I should have mentioned, like, any color commentary or, okay, sounds good.
You did great.
All right. And then poll 3, what are your biggest concerns about implementing AI for sales? Cost and ROI, uncertainty, as well as choosing the right solution are the top 2. I think that is very much mirroring what we're seeing with customers today. I think as we have gone into clients, really understanding what happens today, as well as helping them understand, or at least building out a business case that they would be targeting with the adoption, is a really critical part of that. Secondarily, choosing the right solution, I think it's just going to get more challenging. I think, I'm sure everyone's email folders, LinkedIn, the AI, for better or worse, is getting also a lot better at, there's many SaaS software vendors that are getting much more better from a targeting standpoint. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of promises in the marketplace. I think we're getting some disillusionment, but we're also seeing some really, really great wins. So I think that is something that we definitely at least try to help guide. How do you leverage what you have today? Maybe there's some augmentation of that, and then as necessary, how do you go adopt some new solutions to add into the mix? Because obviously, change management, adding any new systems into an existing ecosystem is always going to be more challenging than leveraging what you have. But just given how quickly AI has evolved, I think what we're finding is a lot of these existing or legacy solutions that are like did not start AI first are really struggling to keep up. So I think in many ways, those can potentially be anchors in your ability to kind of really accelerate that. So rep adoption and resistance, I think that's always going to be a part of the challenge. And I think ideally, at least what we have been able to see is if you're able to kind of adopt something and they really see the benefit. So this is something that really should make their lives easier and should help them get to their, quotas or their targets a lot easier. So if we're able to kind of show that path and, really get people to try it in a very simple way, I think we've seen pretty high success rates with that, as well as kind of satisfaction. So I think it's good to see it won't actually solve our problems at 0%. So that's a good thing. So I think people are at least feeling that, AI is somewhere in the world of focus. And then am a little surprised on the integration with existing systems. So that is something that, I think we are, in addition to kind of, that rep adoption, how do you go plug this into your existing systems? So if you're thinking about like quoting and ordering systems, that's something that we've seen pop up pretty consistently with a lot of clients. So how do you go really leverage the data, leverage some of the assets that are available to really extend that out to the rep in a more effective way? So, hopefully if James and I do a webinar in 6 to 9 months, we begin to see kind of a more strong interest in that existing system integration, since I think we do see that being really critical as you're beginning to think about transforming some of your existing business processes. So I think that is the last slide. So Katie, any other questions, or happy to address 1 or 2 last questions from the audience, or
That's all I got for now.
Happy to say thank you, and I hope everyone enjoys their 3 minutes back, and have a great Wednesday. Really appreciate you spending the time with Katie, James, and myself. And feel free to reach out. I think we're really excited about where the market's going to be going in the next few years. And I think sales is definitely at the intersection of a lot of the strong capabilities of what AI offers. And feel free to reach out if you'd like to chat more. So appreciate it.